All right, guys. So this week we are going to talk about the diaphragm and the importance of it with exercise and breath work. A lot of times, well, everybody starts to breathe through their lungs, and fun fact, that's not really where you should be breathing from. So we're going to kick it over to Jeremy to get us rolling and learn a little bit more.
Sweet. So diaphragm things. To be honest, I'm still kind of in that mode where I'm still trying to learn more about it and how to incorporate it in exercise. However, I think it's one of those things where we forget that, like, we all know it's part of like respiration, breathing, and all that stuff. However, we forget it's a prime, like it's a skeletal muscle, and so it's a prime stabilizer of the spine, right? However, even when we go back to like that breathing component, even with like a shitty non kind of like functioning diaphragm, it's acting as like a secondary like breath muscle, and we're breathing through our chest. We're kind of using like the scalenes and like cervical muscles to breathe and stuff like that. So I think with a diaphragm, we have to consider making sure that we're actually belly breathing, especially at rest, and then we're actually utilizing it as a like spine stabilizer as well in exercise.
I was going to interject and say using it as a catalyst.
Yeah.
Because when I think of diaphragm, and I got to preface literally anything that I say on breathing, diaphragm, whatever, to crediting Rob Wilson and The Art of Breath. We'll make sure we put some links up for that. But virtually everything I've learned on this topic has stemmed from him. So with that being said, when I think about the diaphragm, I just think about origin. I think about the origin of the thorax, the torso. I think about the origin of, respiration, breathing, and kind of, like you alluded to, the centerpiece of, in one way or another, like indirect spinal stability.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, again, to preface all my stuff as of late in terms of a rehab sense have, been from Sue Falsoni. And I mean, she hits the nail on the head when we're talking about, like, again, the autonomic stuff and the exercise piece, just because, again, if we're thinking like anatomically, it attaches and it touches the T-spine, which we talked about, a couple weeks ago. It touches the psoas. So you're going to have like hip flexor problems when, you're really trying to get this hip flexor loose, when really it's probably secondary to a dysfunctioning diaphragm. It attaches to your lumbar spine. It has like direct contacts with your ribs. It's going to influence like intercostal play. So anything, again, a tight muscle, like what do we do with like a hamstring when it's tight? We feel like we have to stretch it out. So the same thing goes with like a diaphragm. If it's like kind of squeezing you in, I mean, it's going to bring you into like this over kyphotic like posture. Even with that too, it's like a dysfunctioning diaphragm could lead to shitty like static postures. You know what I mean?
So I would point also to the fascia network that kind of helps to suspend, for lack of better terms, the diaphragm and the surrounding organs, because you mentioned a ton of structures. Our executive producer has arrived. But also, the aorta penetrates and intersects through, and the vagal nerve, and there's just a lot of shit going on there, and there's a lot of things that are going in through, around, and supporting. So when you think about the fascia network, that having one interconnected piece, then going to all of the skeletal muscle, and I'm not trying to get into the, whatever science now, but I just think to myself, that muscle having any sort of impairment or dysfunction, albeit weak or tight, is going to have some kind of residual effect elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, and again, it's just like any other fascia in the body. If fascia is tight, like, around your like anterior shoulder or pec, I mean, that's going to influence how well I can get back here. Same thing with what you just said. It's, I think that's why there's a lot of like truth to like even visceral manipulations now where they're kind of like working on that suspensory like fascia, like you said. But again, I think with the diaphragm, it ties up to what we've been talking about in the past couple weeks, especially with like the T-spine, when we're talking about mobility. You can crank at the thing the whole time, but if you're kind of reaching a plateau or like a dead stop and you're not thinking about like that diaphragm, I mean, I think it's worth looking at, even if you never looked at it before, you can still be highly functional, but again, it's just another piece of a huge puzzle.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good kind of disclaimer in a way, where none of us are suggesting that like you need to do a shit ton of diaphragmatic specific movements, exercises, or whatever.
Right.
It's more of a conceptual aspect in your approach to training.
Yeah.
In that you just recognize that there's this parachute type muscle that contracts and expands and assists with elevating and depressing the rib cage to create pressures for the lungs to work, right? You think about that in how it correlates or affects breathing, position, posture, the timing. I think about something in weightlifting, coming out of the catch of the clean, they always kind of have that second little jerk, right? And I always think about how that impacts everything, in this region, and then also the breath cadence to it.
Right. And I mean, again, it could be very subtle. Again, I'm still trying to like navigate this whole thing and how I could program it into my own rehab with my guys. I mean, again, like, I don't know, a couple months ago when I had to reach out to Tim, like, how do you incorporate all that stuff with like a shoulder? And then, that's when the gears started rolling. And again, even though like when you mentioned that catch with like the Olympic lifts, even like in like boxing when they're, doing the, it's like, it's a transfer thing too. So that's still incorporating the diaphragm. So I would say like punch a heavy bag screaming versus punch a heavy bag like holding your breath or like not doing.
And that is where Rob Wilson has tons of tremendous information on. So we won't even bother trying to speak to that, but there's a lot to that. You were going to say?
Kind of like going back a little bit, because you guys were on a nice roll, how you were kind of talking about incorporating it into training and things like that. And something that I've kind of learned through one of my clients and her work with rehab and PT is that it doesn't take a lot. So she broke her T-spine, like, I think we're going on almost 3 years now. So the entire first year was just, healing, right? And then we started working together. We started doing a lot of stuff to strengthen and mobilize and get her back moving, all those good things. But she still has a lot of issues and there are a lot of limitations. So she started going to physical therapy just as another modality to kind of help improve her rehab. And one of the things that Amanda from Direct Performance really emphasized was diaphragmatic breathing. And she was literally like, look, just take 5 minutes out of your day, set a timer, lay on the floor and just breathe. She was like, if you do that and nothing else, she was like, you'll still get a benefit from it. So like, yes, it's great to incorporate it with different movements and exercise drills and stuff like that, but it really is something as simple as just breathing. And another thing that she found that she now does, like when we do a lot of her like rehab or exercises as supersets and stuff with a lot of her weightlifting, we now make sure that she incorporates a breath cadence with it, so that way when she's working on something like getting some like adductor activation and like a lat band pull, the first thing she does is take a breath into that diaphragm and then perform the movement and then exhale and then do it again and then exhale. And just that alone has been making a huge difference in helping her heal.
Yeah. So again, I guess to kind of tie that together is like some of the just primitive basics that we're really trying to drive home here is, one, the diaphragm is important and it's a part of your anatomy and it's something that should be recognized or at least aware of with regard to training. Two, breathing cadence matters. yes, you can get into some, nuanced stuff that has very specific lengths, durations, patterns, this, that, and the other. But the gist of it being having some kind of coordinated or cadence breathing where it's inhale on the up, exhale on the down, or whatever, the patterning is. And then 3, that the diaphragm and the surrounding structures are essentially integrated. So, you need to think about how posture, position, and, even I would say to an extent how you sleep, these things all contribute to the system and in some way or another have some contribution to how you perform.
Yeah.
And I mean, and to go off all those points, it's like if you think of like diaphragm and then pelvic floor, like it's like another like swing system.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
like a powerful Valsalva for like huge lifts. And then I think too, with just incorporating that breathing, like the exercise over time, simple stuff. I think over time with that accumulation, any like parasympathetic or central nervous system recovery methods we do, it now becomes better, or like we get those benefits rather than just fucking like doing them. You know what I mean?
There's a pretty good body of evidence that diaphragmatic breathing can, kind of help to induce a more parasympathetic environment. And for layman's, that's increasing your opportunity to recover well.
Right.
So for that reason alone, I would say it's something that's important for everybody. I know deep breathing or diaphragmatic breathing for me, really, you don't want to think about the belly expanding. I cue this as, imagine you have an inner tube around your torso and you're trying to make contact at all points around. So you want to think kind of up and out or up and away almost. And then, making sure that on the exhale, you have the same amount of intent or, drive with that, where you're really trying to deflate and push all the air out of your body from the belly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Nicole put it simply too, it doesn't take much. So again, this is 5 minutes at the end of your training session, a couple of days a week on your harder days.
Yeah. Literally. And it's funny, this parasympathetic thing. So, people with PCOS, and we won't really go too crazy because there's a lot that has to do with it, but when they exercise for certain amounts of time, depending on the severity of their hormonal situation, in order to kind of like lower all of their cortisol back down, breath work and diaphragmatic breathing is what helps them kind of return to that like steady state. And it's literally just 5 minutes of laying on the floor and breathing after your workout, so that way you can allow your body to recover properly and go through, those normal motions.
Right.
Yeah. What's that?
It's very homeostatic.
And for those of you who may be listening and not believe us, I would just challenge you to take 10 deep breaths with a 4-count inhale, 4-count hold, and a 4-count exhale. When you lay down tonight to go to sleep, and tell me if you don't fall asleep faster. I know that's something that was major for me to kind of resetting my sleep patterns, but there's definitely something to it. So all in all, I think that's about what we got. Jeremy, you got anything else to add on that?
Good.
Awesome. Hey, so just a quick final note here. If you guys have any specific requests or anything that you would like us to go into with these weekly calls, I know we haven't been getting a tremendous turnout in terms of audience on these, live audience on these, but if there's things that you want us to talk about or go into, please feel free to DM it to any of us or to the Rude Rock page, and we'll definitely throw that into the mix.